Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. And one of the best parts of the podcast that we're doing is that I get to go out and meet lots of folks, do interviews, and now I'm reliving almost my childhood. I'm sitting in what was the studio that I worked at WHO, and it's been converted now. It doesn't bear any real resemblance to what it was, but we are in the same building, in the same place. And my guest today is Paul Menzel, a dear old friend of mine. I don't know why he's put up with me all of these years, particularly when we were working together. I was kind of the wild man of the newsroom, I think. But Paul's been very good to me through the years. And the reason that I wanted to bring him on, this is a man that's made a career out of that business that I left a long time ago. And he's made a career out of his voice and doing announcements and commercials and marketing and those types of things. And I knew that people would be interested in that, and particularly fellow podcasters, because a lot of people would like to be involved in that professionally and make a living out of it. So we're going to talk with Paul. How you doing, pal?
George, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're home. You've gone full circle.
Yeah, I mean, it's really weird sitting in this room. I remember it very well. I've got a photograph. Matter of fact, maybe I'll put it up on the podcasting website of me sitting across a table doing the news on a Saturday morning. I used to come in and do that to earn some extra dough until like 6:30 to 8:30 in the morning. And I brought my son with me, and he's in his little pajama jumpers, and he's sitting across the microphone from me, and I'm on the air, and I was scared to death he was going to say something or touch something or whatever. But it's a cool little photograph, and it was in this room, and it was a long time ago, Paul.
Which just goes to show you that listeners have no clue as to what goes on. They hear the voice, and they just think that everything is perfect, that the room is perfect, that they arrive at the radio station in a limousine.
Yeah.
And it's nothing like that at all.
Well, it's like meeting your first your favorite disc jockey at the sock hop when you finally meet him. He's not quite the dude that you thought that he was.
Right.
Yeah. So it is different, real world versus radio. So take us back. You're kind of maybe a lay historian anyway. You've archived and you've got a lot of great memories. What do you remember from back in the day when we first worked together, when you first came into this building?
When I first came to Des Moines, that was in 1979. I worked at a small radio station, and then I got this offer to work at WHO Radio, which was the absolute epitome of working in Iowa in broadcasting. Showed up, did the job, wrote commercials, voiced a lot of commercials, to the point where they got sick of my voice and they said, no more commercials. And then I said, well, how about if I start doing different voices? Okay, you can do different voices, but lay off the normal voice. And I've never had a deep, bassy voice, and I can hear it still in your voice. The quality of your voice is distinct, and it causes me to be jealous when I hear it. And now
well, I appreciate that.
You're wearing the headphones, and I'm not wearing the headphones. So if I was wearing the headphones, usually when you wear headphones, it makes you deepen your voice a little bit more because you
diaphragm it. Yeah,
you want to hold one ear like Ronan Martin's laughing.
Yeah, Gary
Owens.
Gary Owens. There you go.
Yes. Yeah. Then I just switched over to the television side in 1986. And wrote and produced TV commercials there. And it was interesting because when I started doing voiceovers on television, that's when people noticed me a lot more than when I did voiceovers on radio. And I think it's just because more people that I met watched television more, and then they recognized my voice.
There's a magic to television, and the way that I recognize it today is if you go out to a big public gathering and maybe a state fair or something like that, and you're doing a live radio broadcast, people walk by you like you're a signpost. If you're doing a live television broadcast, look at the people jumping up and down behind the host, and you know what I'm talking about, like the Today Show, and everybody wants to be on television. There's something weird about it. It's like I tell people it's the monkey in the mirror syndrome. I don't know what it is, but everybody wants to be seen that way.
And voiceovers, I always envisioned myself being a disc jockey at a big major market. But to be honest with you, I never knew what to say when the record ended. By the time you said the time and the temperature and the weather forecast, there was no ad-libbing. I just didn't have that spontaneous, here we go. So I decided to write and produce TV commercials because it was something that, okay, it's a 30-second play, and we're going to write it, we're going to produce it, and we're getting it on the air, and then people will hear it time and time again, as opposed to you do a radio bit, you get one shot at it, and that's it. And if you repeat it again, people will say, well, he said that yesterday.
Right. Yeah, the beauty of live radio. Before we move into future or into present times, take us back there again, because I recall when I first started here, there were still what I've always called booth announcers. And I think of a guy named Bob Williams, people that used to go in and give station IDs live on the air on television and radio. And matter of fact, he was live on the air at about noon on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. He was the guy that gave this audience the news of Kennedy being shot in Dallas, Texas, because he was the only guy, I think, on staff on duty, and he was doing those live cut-ins. And so that's how people found out about it. That was kind of a neat deal for him. That was still going on, I think, when I started here, but that ended in your tenure?
Yeah, and he had the professional voice.
Bob did.
He had, I think it was Maury Miller, who was the house voice.
Right.
And he was the one that would say the ID. Or I think both of them hosted Dialing for Dollars. Remember that?
I remember that show. Yeah.
And then people would see the voice, the face behind the voice, and they'd be on camera. And Bob Williams was another one of these great voices. When you heard it, you just wanted to buy whatever he was selling.
It was just natural, too. You'd meet the guy, and it's the way that he talked. It was just marvelous to hear that guy. I got a Dialing for Dollars story, actually. That was such a big deal in this market when I was a kid growing up. It was on television. And for folks that aren't familiar with it, they had a big bin, like a bingo bin of the phone book cut up. And he would call the fourth number on a sheet of paper that was in this bin that he would twirl, and it was during the afternoon movie that was on like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we watched it religiously because we wanted that money that they were giving away. And this was back in the day when it was significant, and we watched it every day. Out on the farm, never went anywhere. One day my mom had a friend that she wanted to go visit for the first time, highly unusual. She packed up the kids. We went and visited this friend some miles away. He called the house, and everybody called her then and said, my God, why didn't you answer the phone? It was Maury Miller Dialing for Dollars. It was the only time and so then after that, we just stayed home every day, I think, to see that we would be there the next time that he called, and it never happened again, but it did once.
And it still sticks because I think, and I remember Dialing for Dollars, it was in a different television market, but they would tell you, ring number 1. Ring number 2, ring number 3, and then after 4, they would count to 10, and if nobody got it after 6 rings, they would hang up and then announce who they were trying to call.
Oh, my God.
But it was a great time for television.
Yeah, that's great. And when you started, it was radio. We worked together. You were on the promotion side of it, and you recorded a little interview with me. I may have it on a podcast sometime. It's called 19 Minutes with George A. Clark, I think, and it was kind of fun. It was trying to guess my middle name at the time, which was something that I kind of concealed from everybody on the air just for the sake of doing it. They had a on-air contest one time. John France did on Country Music USA for folks to write in and try to guess my middle name. And some woman listening in from down in Lamoni, a farmer, she won. And
was she the only one that guessed it, or was there a group of people?
I think there was a group of people, and they had to have a drawing for her name. But what a big deal. What else do you remember from back then? Again, this is when you first started.
Well, the legends, when I first started, you had Bob Wilbanks.
Yeah, Bob, my God, was he. And this is a shout out to Bob Wilbanks in heaven. I'm telling you, that guy was a great guy. All-world, sterling individual, former Marine and proud of it. Tough guy, but he had a heart of gold, a real soft spot, and he was the mentor for me. Bob Wilbanks was my guiding light as far as his business was concerned. He was on Armed Forces Radio before he came. He was in Sioux City, I think, working in television there, and then came down to WHO and did the television news here, and then eventually moved over to radio in the latter part of his career.
As did Ev Hickman. It seems like they start out on TV, but then they're drawn either back to radio, or they think, this is all a bunch of nonsense with the makeup and the hairstyle.
Yeah.
I just want people to hear my voice. He's another one that had a terrific voice.
It could be that. The other part of it is if you've got consultants involved or just for the business side of it, on radio, they can't every second see how old you are.
Right.
On television, they can. And, of course, it's a youth industry, and those guys get up in years. And good news is they're not out on the street. The bad news is they're kind of shuffled off to Radioville.
Our good friend Mike Newell was the one who they basically said, "Have you thought about a toupee?" And he said, "I'm not wearing a toupee." Well, I don't think you're going to have much of a future in television. So he said, "Fine, we'll switch over to radio."
Great. All these things remind me of stories. When I was on the air here, we were doing a talk show, and we had Leon Emmons, who was the owner of Mr. Executive Toupee Shop, come down here just as a talk show interview. And when it was over with, he says, "I think I could fix you up," because I was losing my hair even back then as a young man. I started to lose my hair, and I don't know. I'm like Mike Newell. I'm not a toupee kind of guy. I'm from a small town. I go back there every once in a while, and I don't think I'm wearing a toupee. Now he says, "Come on down." He says, "We got this new science." He says, "We blend it in with your own hair, and we start small so that people can't even tell that you've got it, and then we add to it, and you're gaining hair slowly, and people become accustomed to it. They don't even notice it. That's the way to go." I'll say, "Okay, so I'll go down there." "All right, that sounds all right to me." He says, "Come down to the shop." So I go down there, and a beautiful facility, and beautiful young women working on your hair, and I thought that was kind of cool. But what he did was he pulled, because it was free and it was just for demonstration purposes, basically, he pulled a piece off of the shelf, put it on my head, and it was a full head of hair, first time. But it looked perfect. But, of course, they do the work on it. They comb it, and they meld it all in, or however you want to call it. But, I mean, I looked at myself. It was as much hair as I'd had since I was 16 years old, probably. And it looked great. But I went home with it, and it was such a radical change. I couldn't wear it. I mean, I took some pictures of it, and my wife and I had a laugh, and I took it off and put it in a Ziploc baggie, and kind of just sneaked back there and took it back to him. I couldn't wear it. But, if I had gone on and pursued a career in television, for instance, I wouldn't have had any problem in another market where everybody didn't know me, where I didn't grow up, wearing the thing.
Right. But why? You got to make that decision.
Yeah.
What do I want to do for my whole life?
Yeah. Mike Newell, that's great. And I hear his voice still on some things. That's one thing. Your voice kind of outlives you sometimes.
Oh, sure. And I've often wondered that too. We've done TV commercials where the people have passed away. Yeah. And we keep it on the air unless they ask us to take it off. Usually they're kind of impressed. They're kind of, wow, that's my mother, or that was my grandmother, and she's still on TV, even though she's passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do, this goes back to Jim Zabel. And Jim Zabel great voice, but he was from this old school of, I can knock this out in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And so he would record it, and it would be 65. And he would go, nope, I got it. And he would do it again, but he would keep messing up. So he'd always start from the beginning of the commercial. And I said, Jim, this is 1980. We have tape, and we have razor blades, and we can cut the bad part out and just have you, trust me. Oh, no. He still wanted to prove that he had the chops to be able to interpret and record a commercial in 60 seconds and not trust anybody to splice it.
Yeah.
And that, finally, I think after a while, he realized, you can just splice that, can't you?
He was a piece of Jim Zabel was a great guy. This is out on the World Wide Web, of course, for people that are not familiar with Jim Zabel. He was voice of the Iowa Hawkeyes, the voice of sports on WHO radio and television for, 40, 50 years. I mean, he was around forever,
But it was that generation that said, they did a lot of live radio, live TV, and you can't screw up. You know,
Right.
you have to be able to nail it first time without being distracted, without stuttering. And, you know, they were very good at it. But I think as they grew older, they realized, you know, I don't have to work this hard anymore.
Yeah.
I can just simply let this newbie, meaning me,
Yeah.
you know, just splice it up and
With tape and a razor blade.
yeah, and make it look good.
Yeah, a lot of people don't remember what that's like. I remember what that was. Yeah, and there was an art form. I mean, you'd run the tape back and forth on the head of the recorder to find out exactly where you wanted to be, and there'd be a splice block for the razor blade and that tape, whatever it was, that clear tape. And guys that were good at it were as good almost as digital editors are today with the software, and you could make magic that way, and you could correct a lot of errors that way.
Sure, and it's so much easier now, and I don't know if people realize how easy it is because back then, you know, nobody had microphones at home, and nobody, you know, you went to a professional studio with a professional microphone to have a professional person record you on professional quarter-inch audio tape that he would professionally cut and get paid lots of money for his expertise, and you know.
Yeah.
Now it's just pretty easy for anybody to get involved, and it's fun because I think it's opened up doors to so many people that have the talent that really don't have to learn the process. Even you got to learn a little bit, but it's pretty easy.
Yeah, it's dead simple. And before we move on, I just love these reminiscences. I want to tell this one story about Jim Zabel because it's one of my best, and I don't know when I'll get back to it as far as the podcast is concerned, but. And both of the people in this story are no longer with us, so I'm, you know, not going to hurt anybody's feelings, I don't think, not on this earth anyway. But we were down in the studio doing the morning news at 6:30 a.m., and Larry Kotler, a dearly departed friend of mine, was filling in for Zabel doing the morning cut-ins on sports. He comes into the studio at 6:30 in the morning and says, "This is great." He says, Zabel's out with Hayden Fry and the Hawkeyes in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. And he was with the team last night, and he's going to come on the air live with us this morning. And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Larry, it's 4:30 in the morning in Pasadena because of the time difference." He says, "Yeah, I know it. No, he's good. He's ready to go. Just give it to me, and we'll just take it from there." Well, okay. So he goes into the control room with our board operator Max Bennington, the engineer of the morning. Max was great too, by the way, and starts waving his hands around. He's ready to go. So he's got Zabel on the line, runs back in front of the microphone. I turn it over to him, and he introduces Zabel, and Zabel was not awake. Zabel had been up and had a big night the night before, I think, or whatever, but he did not know that he was on the air. He did not know that he was awake. He did not know what he was saying, and what he was saying was largely unintelligible. I mean, it was pretty bad. And before we could get him off the air, I thought we were all going to get fired. I thought, oh, my God, I'm going to walk out of here, and they're going to hand me the pink slip, you know, but... we got away with it, but if anybody heard that, I would sure like to hear about it because we never heard about it back then. Nobody ever said anything.
And you know, at the time, there was multiple copies, but there was no way of distributing it. You would have to physically make a cassette tape of it to share with somebody else.
Anyway, yeah.
And now, you know, that nobody probably has a copy of it.
Nah, we didn't do enough air checking. We could record anything down in the newsroom, of course, and so could they in the production studio. And they had a master tape that recorded the entire broadcast day, but it was a real slow-turning reel and was very poor quality and was not anything that you'd ever want to use. But there was some stuff that we did back in the day, and I'm not going to get into those things in this particular podcast, but there were some stories that we did that really I wish could be found somewhere, and I don't know if those tapes exist or if I've got them in a basement someplace or whatever. But anyway, that's enough about those other folks, I guess, unless you've got somebody else you want to talk about. I want to talk about you, so tell me about doing these voices, and tell me about writing and producing commercials, because like I said, there's a lot of people out there interested in that.
What I liked best about broadcasting is that you could write the commercial, and then you could voice it, and you could add the sound effects, and you did it all. And that's kind of the same way we do it on television now, too. We don't go to a production house. We write the commercial, we voice it, we splice it together, and now there's just video pictures that go with it. that was my draw. That was the creativity that I liked, that you'd have complete control. An agency, as good as they are, they'll take this, well, we got to hire a voice now. And, the price of voiceovers has gone way down. There was a time when you could make a lot of money doing voiceovers, especially on television. But, again, it's so easy to send a script by... I was going to say fax, but that's old school. But just to send a file to somebody anywhere in the country who's got a great, powerful voice, who's not from this market, and they will send you back an MP4, MP3. See, MP3.
Yeah.
Or a wave, and then you just edit it, and then you have it all to yourself, and that's the voice that you have. And some of the voiceovers that we have now, I don't know where these people are. I don't know their last names. I know their first names, and I send it to the service. The service distributes them, and they send it back within 24 hours, and that's the voice. And now, what I am envious of, and I've always been envious of people that have the deep, rich voice, and that could talk slowly. And it's like a bank institution voice.
Yeah,
Max
sure.
Bennington was a wonderful
Max, great voice. Yeah.
John Prigi, still working at WHO Radio, has a great voice, has that low voice, that soothing voice. And I always had to go more to the character. I had to go more to the almost talking in a character voice like that, where you would find yourself talking like a little bit like Jimmy Stewart, or sometimes you get into that Casey Kasem voice where you just talk about that, but it's all in the pacing, and pretty soon you're starting to talk about other people who has started a band in their garage.
That's great.
But the regular voice was. I was never happy with my voice, and it probably wasn't until I decided just be happy with the voice that you have. It's the only voice you can really do that's you. All the other voices sound fake. And I don't know if you did this when you started broadcasting. I sure did when I was a disc jockey, when I was trying to figure out what to say.
And we all did it.
You would get real deep in your voice like that, and you'd look at the clock and you'd say it's 11:15, 15 minutes after 11.
Yeah.
And you'd have to repeat the time because it was one way to stall or do something.
Yeah.
Of course, back then, too, when you're a disc jockey, the ultimate goal was being able to talk up a record, which would, most of these songs back then had a 16-second audio instrumental before they started singing.
Yep.
And so the goal was to talk it up to the start of the singing.
Yep.
And, sometimes you would nail it. Other times you would talk right on top of the first couple of words, and it was terrible.
After you'd spun the record enough, you knew it. Yeah, all the records or all the music that was on cart back then that we had would tell you whether or not it was an instrumental open or a cold open. And it was a big deal in the recording industry. They didn't like to distribute records that started with vocal colds, because it didn't give the disc jockey an opportunity to talk up that ramp.
But when I hear your voice, and I still think about this, when I hear your voice, I'm still hearing this 24-year-old guy.
Yeah, well, that's good.
26-year-old, because your voice truly has not changed. It is still the same.
Yeah.
When people hear your voice, they don't know how old you are, and that's kind of the beauty. What's interesting about a woman's voice is that usually a woman's voice sounds a lot younger than she really is. So sometimes you got to find a really old woman, or for instance, Cindy Axne, who's running for Congress.
Sure.
She's got a great voice, great deep voice, and if it doesn't work out for her, I can help her make a lot of money because she's got a mature sounding woman's voice, not a voice that sounds like a teenager. And so when you produce the commercial, you got to make sure that you got a voice that can pull this off. Not just somebody who's a good reader and can read without making any mistakes, but you have to have somebody that is an actor, somebody that's
gravitas.
Yeah, somebody that has the chops to put it together, and that's what makes the best voiceovers are probably the stage actors, because they know how to throw themselves into it, and they are acting the role. So many voiceovers.
It's like method acting almost. And the guy that taught me a long time ago, Jim Duncan, former broadcast great and instructor for a number of years. After I got out of college and was in the business, I went back and interviewed him one time, and I walked into his office and set up the microphones and stuff, and he puts his head in his hands, and I thought, well, does he have a migraine? Does he have a headache or whatever? And then eventually his face popped out of his hands, and he was like a different guy. I mean, he was in character. You know, he was doing the method acting thing
Mm-hmm.
actually, and the interview was that way, and his articulation was perfect, and his voice was authoritative, and it was kind of amazing stuff. Yeah, I've seen that. It's a transformation.
And anymore now, you know, there's more of a natural flow. You know,
Yeah.
people don't.
And voices of all colors. Everybody's voice has some unique quality to it almost.
And I still think it's the people that succeeded, and I did this for a while but didn't pursue it, are the people that take care of their voice and they go get voice lessons. They learn how to project from their diaphragm. They learn how to talk softly but still have the power behind that voice. And, you know, all of us, when we're doing, you know, voiceovers, you know, we get really close to the microphone, and you just naturally you take one hand and put it up by your ear.
Gary Owens.
If you don't have headphones, and then you try to talk really softly, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and then of course all the different compression tools that you have to make the voice sound that much better. But I still think you have to have a strong voice. What bothers me is that I'll be talking to somebody and they'll have a terrific voice, and I'll say, why didn't you go into broadcasting? Why don't you do voiceovers? You got this wonderful voice that, you know, you could make a lot of money. And I think that's what people do nowadays. You know, if you just go online and just type in voiceovers, you'll find all sorts of different services where it's a stable of voices, men and women that can do character voices, that can do deep, rich voices, and it's cheap. It's, you know, take a guess what the average voiceover is.
Yeah, I've looked before. I mean, they get like $50 or something. It's not much.
No, it's $1 a second. You know, so you got a 30-second TV commercial or a radio commercial. You just send it to somebody, and you send them $30, and you know they bill you once a month, and they're great voices. And rather than having the same voice on the same station all the time, now you can selectively say, you know, Kevin, who lives in Orlando, Florida, is going to be the voice for this client. And what we're going to do is we're going to send him the spot, the script, and then he's going to send it back to us as a file, and we put it together, and boom. But, you know, back in the day, you had to hunt for a voiceover.
Well, if you used one, or they just had a guy like you that did all the voices, and like you say, eventually, if you just used one, they get sick of you. There weren't any services back then. I mean, grab guys off the street.
Right.
There were some little local studios.
Sure, there was a local studio called Triad, and they were wonderful. But, you know, the clients that we worked for was like, oh, wait a minute, we're buying advertising and we have to pay for production? And radio, we never charge for production. Television, we do charge for production. Yeah.
In the news business, or on that side, it was kind of hard to get positive reinforcement or feedback. When you did something really good, you knew it. Your news director might know it. You might hear a little bit out on the street, but unless you won a Peabody or something like that, that's about what it amounted to. In your business, how do you know that you've done a good job? Is it just client satisfaction, or the fact that they renew? Do you have people renew just because they like the commercials and the way that they're done, or is it because of the salespeople like you and reuse you, or you know, what are your greatest hits? How do you know what was good and what wasn't?
And you sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. I mean, obviously, if the client is happy, you'll get business with them again. And it's interesting because usually the client's idea, go with that idea, because their idea, it's going to work. Whether it works or not, they're going to say it works.
I know exactly what you mean.
If I say, oh, no, we don't want to do your idea, client. You want to go with my idea because I'm the professional writer and I'm the professional voice. Do this, and it may be a fabulous commercial. But if you don't have the client behind you, you might as well just, you know, kiss him goodbye, because he's not gonna like it if it wasn't his idea. So you got to bring him into it, make him feel like it's his idea, and then compromise. And tell them why you think the idea is going to work or why the idea isn't going to work. Sure, you know, I would like to say that the best radio or TV commercial is the one that sells the most product for the client. But you can't. You don't know anymore. You don't know where they heard about you. Was it word of mouth? Because somebody else heard the TV commercial? Is it something that they saw online and they happened to hear a radio commercial? So it has this synergistic effect where, you know, boy, I hear them all the time on radio and TV. You know, the greatest thing about Bill Reichert did a lot of radio and TV advertising.
Remember Bill? Yeah.
And he was a clothier, famous Hawkeye football player, but you know, basically most people would have remembered him from the days when he had a clothing store. And they would say, boy, he's on camera all the time. He's on TV all the time. No, he wasn't. He was on camera on commercials for maybe 1 or 2 weeks a month, and then he'd be off. But he was consistently on year after year after year, telling the same message. And I think that's what people got used to it. And that's why they thought he was on camera all the time. But really, he wasn't on camera that much.
Well, the sports fans can correct me, but I think his claim to fame at the University of Iowa, he was the most valuable player in the Big Ten one season, and the Hawkeyes never won a game.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so that is a true story.
Sure.
You heard that too, yeah.
Sure.
And I knew him well. He was a great guy. Well, when I look back on my career, and it was all too brief, as I've mentioned before on this show, I think of things like that interview that I did with the guy at Voice of Barbados that broke the news blackout, the embargo on the Grenada invasion. That was a big deal for me. We'll talk about that later. But what do you think's your best work? What was the best that you've been able to accomplish to this point?
It was probably a TV commercial that we did. It was sponsored by the Iowa Clinic, and it was the theme was "I Will Walk," and it was a walk for breast cancer. And you were walking for somebody who had breast cancer. So the commercial started out with, "I will walk for my mom. I will walk for my sister. I will walk for my grandmother." And it was leading you to believe that this person, this woman, had passed away. And so now, in honor of this woman, we're going to go ahead and walk for her. And then the announcer comes in and talks about the event and when it's going to happen. And then at the end, the woman who everybody thought was dead is alive. And then she says, "I will walk for me because I'm a breast cancer survivor." So you're leading people down one way, thinking that she had passed away, and they were all holding the same picture of her. But then at the end, she's holding a picture of herself, and she's saying, "I will walk because I'm a breast cancer survivor." And it was just the impact, because you didn't think it was coming. And that's the biggest word, I think, in television or radio advertising is, what has the biggest impact? What gets you? And usually it's an emotion. Sometimes it might be humorous. Sometimes it might be just just really goosebumps. And that's stuff like that. And even if the client doesn't like it, or if they say, "Yeah, it's okay," we like it and we think it works great. And then I think that one did win like the best commercial of the year award in the local advertising. And so that kind of backed up our idea and our assumptions that this is pretty good. This is going to work out real good.
And that was your concept. That was your writing to put it together, edit it like that.
Yep. And with the Iowa Clinic, and then also with another member on our staff who brainstorming. And then actually, I don't even think we know which one of us actually finally connected the whole thing. We just started talking, and then finally it just evolved into that. And pretty soon we had the idea, but I don't think any of us can take credit for it because we don't know how it actually evolved into what it came to be.
And before we wrap up, I've got to share this with you. I remember, and I don't think of us as that old. I mean, you mentioned my voice maybe hasn't aged that much. You don't look that old. I don't really think of old people don't think of themselves that way. But when I was on the air, I remember Herb Plambeck would come in and do a little segment after the news. Again, this was on Saturdays, oddly enough, but I'd do that Saturday morning news, and then Herb would come in and do a little gardening show of some type. I don't even remember what it was. And I remember looking at him thinking, "Man, you're old. I mean, and it's gardening, and what is this guy doing here? Why do they even let him on I guess it's Saturday morning, so it's all right if somebody wanted to tune that in." And then I was kind of a wise-ass kid at that point and did a little research. This guy had a sterling broadcasting career. He was a World War II correspondent.
Sure.
I mean, he was one of those guys over there under fire with a recorder bringing back stories of Iowans, and just a heroic thing that these guys, compared to me sitting there reading farm markets or whatever at 6:30 in the morning on Saturdays. His legacy was intact and quite impressive. So, the thing about that is we're about Herb's age. Yeah. I mean, and I thought he was ancient at that time.
Well, I'm 62. When my dad was 62, he was retired, and he looked like a 62-year-old man, but World War II vet, and
Hard miles.
Yeah, and kind of a diamond in the rough. Nicest guy, but I don't feel that I look or even sound 62-ish. I still think it's youthfulness, and I don't know if it's what we're eating or if it's just the way we feel about ourselves, and our parents felt the same way that
or a better life.
They
We think better physically, maybe, but also less stress. And like I said, he was World War II.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, what they went through and the life that they had, and by the time you got to be 62 years old, if you lived that long, you'd had some issues, probably mentally, but physically also. And we've benefited. We've been very lucky that way.
Sure.
We're soft,
Yep.
In a lot of respects, I got to admit. Well, I'm going to circle back on this. We'll do this again. I really enjoyed this. Maybe we'll break this up into 2 segments, or maybe we'll come back and do another podcast by George from what was the old WHO studio with Paul Menzel. Anything else that you want to mention or say that I didn't ask about?
Oh, I would say your voice is so powerful, and if you listen, you personally, but then people's voices in general. If people understood how much the voice can work for you, they would treat their voice better. And they would realize that when you're watching somebody, it's the voice that's I played it was Matt Lauer, the former NBC TV host. His voice was so good, and he was so good at what he did. But people are attracted because of television. They're attracted to the way they look. But if you just listen to the voice is so powerful, and it is so useful to get your point across if you know how to control it, how to use it. And you try to tell this to younger people that, especially in television, it's not about looks, it's your voice. And if you could have all the best looks ever, but if your voice is nasally or if you're not using it correctly, it's just not going to work out. And that's true in radio too.
Yeah, I used to work on work with a television show, and they said the same thing. Surprisingly, the most important thing is the audio. Mm-hmm. It's the sound. It's the voice on a television show.
Yep.
And you would think, no, it's how it looks. Not if it's going to be successful.
Right. And you just listen to the different broadcasters who do the sports play-by-play. The good ones are the ones that take you there and are optimistic and are strong and humorous and they're not dull. Because some radio broadcasters, it's like they're reading a script all the time.
Yeah.
And you can tell that. But after a while, it's that spontaneity. Again, I never had it, but the people, it's just fun to listen to. People that can talk, and maybe it's their mind-mouth coordination, where they can see it, think it, say it, and it comes out flowing. And I can't do that. I need the script in front of me. And that's why this is so difficult.
Yeah, well, I've seen people like that my entire career. When the red light came on, there was nothing there. The red light would go off in front of a small group of people, comedians. Lovely people, great people, but they just couldn't bring it off on the air.
Right.
I don't know what it is that way, but I have seen that before. All right, we're going to leave it there. I really enjoyed this. Like I said, we'll come back to it. And I want to thank everybody for listening in, of course, to a podcast by George. And I hope all the time, but certainly this time, at the end of the segments, you think, by George, I think he's got it.